this is just going to be a casual chat with myself and Britta here. Just a little bit more of an introduction, I guess. Previously, currently I work on Open Source Observer with Ray and Carl. You've probably seen them talk today. But at some point in my career in the past, I worked in the government. I also worked on a project that kind of derived from an open source project from the government. Which, is kind of a good tie-in to some of the things that Britta has done, because I think she has a really amazing kind of path to where she is now. I shouldn't say any of this. I think just to let her talk. So, So Britta, tell me, how have you arrived at open source? It's a pretty broad question.
Is this working? All right, yeah. So when I was about 18 years old, I was working for a startup that got sold to Yahoo, and I didn't want to go through that again in the rest of my life. So I decided to work on other things. So I had a very early experience with just like working on something really hard that was, proprietary and got sold again and became unrecognizable. So for a while, I worked on Cydia. So Cydia was an open source, well, it still is, an open source package manager with a little marketplace on top. We called it the alternative app store for jailbroken iPhones and iPads. And so what we did instead of having venture funding or getting sold to Yahoo was a little tiny marketplace where people could use the open source tools that we made. And that was my first experience working on open source professionally.
Your work in the government, I think, one of the things I guess I wanted to kind of dig into is, I would say, in that specific regard, Web3 people might be more averse to things that are very, like when I say public, I mean like, Big Brother government public kind of things, right? But I think it's very interesting to hear like what kind of open source work that they're doing there, actually.
You can have a day job working in open source for the government, turns out. So I was working at 18F, which is part of the General Services Administration. This is a consulting team made of engineers, designers, product managers, and so on and so forth, who are federal employees who work in the General Services Administration and work on almost entirely open source software. So they partner with other government agencies who have some kind of technology problem they need to solve and work with them and help them pick software, and usually quite boring software, right? These are what we say very fondly, boring problems. They should be solved with boring technology, right? It's like you need a database. But also then, when I was at 18F, I worked on a platform that was available for government called cloud.gov. And that was based on open source Cloud Foundry software, sort of a Heroku-esque platform as a service. And all of the code we wrote was also open source. And we were able to get a sort of security compliance authorization, a FedRAMP authorization, even though it was open source, through some very careful negotiation. But yeah.
So that's so cool. You were telling me at some point, we were chatting about this prior, that building open source in the government is actually something that that ends up actually working out. Like the government has started to realize that it actually works in its favor, from a quality perspective. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes. So that's part of why 18F advocates for open source software. So what 18F is trying to do is to get other government agencies to buy and build better software. So when most software in the government is made by contractors, and then if you require those contractors to do open source work while they're working for you, they will deliver better quality because they don't want to be embarrassed by shipping just like really shitty software when everybody can see their name on it.
Yeah. The government is open source at this point that are in use by other organizations, like widely. And what are they? Like, I'm very curious, actually. Yeah.
It's less common because a lot of the time it's like really custom for that agency's really specific thing. But there's a couple of them that are fun. One is just, if you go to analytics.usa.gov, you can see like visits on government websites and like what the top most visited government website is today. It's usually the United States Postal Service, like, where's my package? But there's a couple other governments that have like copied that code to deploy.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, just for fun. I was, it's a small
wow.
thing.
We should capture that in OSO to see what governments are, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
The thing I work on now, also, it's called e-regulations, was originally written by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to make their regulations, because they were a brand new agency at the time, to make their regulations more readable by the public. And so it's a website that kind of makes the regs more readable and makes the sub-regulatory guidance, we're getting really government here, makes the sub-regulatory guidance easier to find in context with the regulations. And then the agency I work for, the Medicaid staff needed something like that. So they took the code that ATF had improved, that CFPB had written, and then deployed it internally there, and that's what I work on. But it's still open source.
If you were to start again today, what's the pathway you would
Yes.
like, what does that look like, actually?
Yes, that is my pitch. It's a pretty good day job, right? Like, you get paid not like you would in one of the big companies that makes a lot of money. You definitely don't get paid like that, but it does get paid better than like working at your average nonprofit. And you get to work on open source all day. So yes, the paths are, if you have some experience, you can work for like ATNF or USDS, these like in-house agencies where you can, be a federal employee, right? And other federal agencies will hire some folks for their like digital services groups that go in and try to do on stuff. But a more practical path, especially if you don't have a ton of experience, is to work for one of these government contractors. But they are not just the Booz Allen Hamiltons, the Deloittes. Like, those are a thing you can work for. But there's a lot of small businesses that are often called like Digital Services Coalition, like the one I work for, which is like a very obscure company based in Chico. It's got 40 people, but this is what I do all day. And so looking for one of these small business government contractors that works with Health and Human Services or all different kinds of agencies.
Awesome.
Round of applause, please, for these folks. Thank you guys so much.